the first audit committee of the new council period. For the benefit of the tape and the audience, my name is Alan Connett and I chair the committee, and Paul Hayward to my right is vice chair. I don't intend to go around the room because I think we'll just get to know each other as we crack on with business. I have some things to say. I'm really glad to see you all on a wet, grey June morning, made all the sadder in my view by the death of Brian Wilson. I hope by the end of it you all go home with good vibrations. Whether you do or not, God only knows. Oh, come on. I mean, you know, it's not a bad. Thank you very much. I'll leave you to surf in any other. That's enough, isn't it? Anyway, look, I am to remind colleagues that those joining remotely to mute their microphone and turn off their camera unless speaking. That the meeting is being live streamed. All speakers are asked to ensure they use and talk into their microphone. Can I say that the County Council is trying very hard to eradicate the informality? I know we all know each other by first names, but when speaking, it would be helpful to either describe the officer's job title along with their name and to refer to colleagues as councillor, whatever. Okay, I'm sure that we will forget that from time to time, but let's see if we can sort of start as we mean to go on. We are to assume that all colleagues and officers have read all of the papers, except for today. We are assuming that you may not have read item 9, the annual governance statement, because that was a late paper, and I'm sure everyone will realise that we're not going to have any more late papers. So you may not have had the chance, in fairness, to have read it. We will spend longer on that, and due notice to officers presenting that we will need a longer introduction to that, and then we'll come to and deal with that at the time. All right. So on the basis that for everything else, we'll assume people have read it. Cabinet members and officers are asked to keep their introductions to their items brief, raising only key points to the committee. Right, let's move on then. Item 1 is apologies for absence, which I think we have one.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, Councillor Simon Rake.
Thank you. And then declarations of interest or anything interesting to declare? Nothing? Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. So we move to the minutes, and I know that colleagues will not necessarily hear on the 27th of February, but good practice, I am told, is that you can actually endorse the minutes even if you weren't at a meeting. Are you content with the minutes of the 27th of February, which will have gone through at least one council meeting in the in-between time? A proposer, Councillor Morgan. May I have a seconder? Well, I'll second. And are we in favour? All right, okay, they are approved in that case. I'm not aware of any items requiring urgent action, save to say that at the end of the meeting, when the meeting is closed, if colleagues could remain, because I know Councillor Sellis wants to make some observations about the agendas. All right, and for that, councillors who are joining online may like to stay if we can work that with everyone else going. All right. So we then move to item 5, which is the informing the audit risk assessment. And Catherine. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Catherine Long. I'm the Assistant Director for Finance, and I'm going to be talking through agenda item 5, which is informing the audit risk assessment for 24-25 for Devon County Council. I first want to note as well, this is also my first audit committee, having joined sort of less than 2 months ago. So please, if I can't answer questions directly or anyone in the room can't, happy to take those away and come back. So the purpose of this report, it's part of the auditor's risk assessment procedures. Grant Thornton are required to obtain an understanding of management processes and the authority's oversight for a number of areas, including general inquiries of management, fraud, laws and regulations, impact of laws, related parties, going concerns and accounting estimates. So the auditors are asking Audit Committee to consider whether the responses set out from management are consistent with their understanding and whether any further comments the committee wishes to make. I want to also note that at the time this paper was prepared, the statements of accounts for 24-25 were still being drafted. Therefore, under accounting estimates, if it wasn't available, we have used the audited figures from 23-24. There are a couple of items I wanted to note in particular, noting there are obviously about 51 questions on here, so there's quite a lot of content. Many are quite standard answers, but in particular reference, I wanted to mention, so under question 1, there is reference to SEND as noted as one of the key events or issues for the council. Under question 2, there's reference to accounting policy, accounting for leases, IFRS 16, which is quite a significant accounting standard change this year, to how we treat leases. And under question 4, these are just the start, mentioning the change in terms of the Sky Park partnership and the exit from St Modwins, and that is now a fully 100% subsidiary of DCC in the way it works. So there's just a couple of points I wanted to mention. Obviously, there's a lot of content in here for a range of management, so happy to take any questions on individual items.
Thank you. Colleagues, any questions?
Just a comment that it's a huge report, which is a lot to get. It's one of many huge reports that we've read. I'm just wondering if in future there could be a summary and points for us to look for of that might be relevant that we need to look at out of interest, because we've read all the way through. I mean, you've done a summary, but are there issues in the summary that you want to draw our attention to? Sorry.
Thank you. I submitted a few questions in advance. I'll just ask on question 1, which was about the safety valve. I think the note talks about whether the safety valve will be posted to the revenue reserve rather than the DSG adjustment account, which I don't pretend to understand, but has a decision been made on what is happening and what is the impact either way?
I think I may have to defer to Angie Sinclair on this one, if that's all right, to discuss the DSG adjustment account.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Catherine. Happy to pick this one up. So the government require us to hold the SEND deficit in what they call an unring-fenced reserve on the balance sheet, which is a strange place. It doesn't directly impact our normal working reserves. That continues for the last financial year. So the deficit will be posted to the unring-fenced reserve, unusable reserve, as we've done in previous years. That statutory obligation on us to do that expires in March 2026. We were hoping, as part of the spending review yesterday, that information would be forthcoming from the government on a roadmap on how they were going to deal with SEND going forward. But any of you that watched the speech yesterday will have noted that there was no mention of SEND at all. And I think a slight gasp in the chamber when children's issues was left and the Chancellor moved on to NHS. So the document that backs up the statement yesterday indicates there'll be now a white paper in the autumn. So we're not expecting anything now until the autumn. But to answer the direct question, yeah, the deficit will be posted to the unusable reserves as it has been for the last few years. And we have that again for the current year when we get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. So can I come back to what's the impact of that accounting? What does it have any impact? Is there anything that the committee should recognise in what is happening?
Thank you. So the impact of posting the deficit to the strange place on the balance sheet is that it protects the County Council's reserves. If and when that ring fence is removed, so if it is removed as planned next March, that will mean that the entirety of that deficit, if the government has not taken action to fund it or write it off in some way, will move from unusable to usable reserves. And that will put at risk the financial viability of the County Council and many other councils across the country. This is not something that's unique to the County Council, but nonetheless, we have to deal with our own issues. So we need to watch with interest what government are doing. So it doesn't affect our going concern assessment or the rest of the risk assessments that you have before you today, but we must be mindful of what government are doing with the ending of that statutory override, as it's called, which requires us to keep it in a strange place.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from colleagues? Okay, can I just then go to question 6, which was, are you aware of any guarantee contracts? And I read the answer, and I'm not actually sure what it is, the effect of the written reply. So could an officer explain?
Thank you, Chair. So this is where we've removed so this is in relation to Exeter Science Park, where we had a guarantee for a loan. So basically the provision has now been removed from the accounts because it's not needed anymore, because that loan has been settled through sort of a capital investment. So basically the provision's been taken out because that loan has been repaid. Obviously, I'd defer to Angie in case she wants to add anything, knowing the background.
Thank you. Happy to come in again. So, yeah, many years ago, we, with Exeter University, agreed to make some guarantees for the Exeter Science Park. Those have now been expunged, so we're no longer obligated under the guarantee for the science park. In essence, the guarantee crystallised, but rather than crystallising the guarantee and giving our revenue funds to cover the repayment of the loan that Science Park had taken out, we've, as shareholders, put extra money, extra shares into the science park so that the science park could afford to make the repayment itself. So the provision that we had set up to fund that guarantee, I think it was £1.8 million that we had set aside in case that guarantee crystallised, has now been released. So we no longer have that that guarantee. So it's a good news story.
Thank you very much. Chief Executive.
Chair, I just really want to ask a question of Chair and members, is that considering this is an audit risk assessment, we have listed a significant event in terms of SENS and implications for the council. And the announcements that came through yesterday, the subsequent impact of that timeline that's been announced by national government, I think has to be considered by the audit committee in terms of our ability to set a budget for 26-27. If you now think that we're going to set an autumn timeline, and the question mark of whether that deficit is going to be removed by national government or not, that has a significant impact, an event, on what we look at as an organisation in terms of the budget gap for next year, and some of the decisions that we'd make linked to the fact that we are contributing to reserves and we are contributing revenue to a safety valve programme that has now been halted by national government. So I just wanted to raise that the announcement yesterday, I think, is a significant event in terms of timelines and the consequences. And I just think that audit should be considering that as a matter of urgency or somewhere in the council, because that's not what was expected at all yesterday. As a team of officers, we go to ongoing meetings about the safety valve, but that really was quite a surprise and unexpected. So I just think I have to raise that real concern.
Thank you. I'm going to hold that because we'll come back to it. But Councillor Sellis.
Thanks. Given that information, do we as an audit committee have to notify the council, or is there just for formality?
That's a brilliant question. Thank you. Can I hold that too? So we'll come back to that. I just want to run through what's already here, and then we'll just pick up the send. All right. Lovely. Thank you. Thank you for the answers on that. I just wanted to take colleagues to question 24, which was about what arrangements are in place to report fraud issues and risks to the audit committee. Sorry, isn't it 20? I've read you 23, 24. Sorry, it's wrong. I've given you the wrong question. 24 is, are you aware of any whistleblowing potential or complaints? But the answer given doesn't answer the question. So what is the answer?
Happy to take that, Chair. Yes, we receive a number of whistleblowing allegations and complaints. They come to a number of different individuals, and we do collate a central list. For the purposes, I suppose the short answer for the purposes of this question is, are we aware of any specific problems with whistleblowing allegations or complaints that are due to come in that are of any major concern, and the answer to that is no. But we do receive whistleblowing allegations. They come to myself as the Director of Legal and Democratic Services and the Monitoring Officer. They'd also come into the Director of People and Culture, the Head of Devon Audit Partnership, and the Director of Finance and Public Value, depending on what nature the whistleblowing allegations are. We will then allocate a lead officer who will liaise and ensure that's properly investigated. If the allegations relate to a disciplinary matter or a HR matter, then they're dealt with as part of that process, and the majority of what we receive are exactly that and dealt with as part of the HR process. Obviously, you're entitled to see those if you want to see them as an audit committee. It may be that we need to redact or deal with certain matters in part 2, but I'm more than happy to bring those if you want to see them at some point. But for the purposes of Grant Thornton, they would have, they come to myself as monitoring officer, they ask about whistleblowing allegations, if there's anything of significant concern or that relates to fraud or that's something that's of a serious nature. And I've replied back, no, because I'm not aware of any, and I'm not aware of any in the pipeline. They also asked me about fraud matters and member matters. So they'd have a separate discussion with me as monitoring officer, and that's where that's picked up.
Thank you for that. And Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. Questions 13, questions 16 and question 17 all have an identical answer. Looks like it's just been cut and paste. Concerns me slightly because the risk within risk reviews is simply that you cut and paste and you carry things forward, and actually there's no progressive way of looking at these things, and that relates to bank mandate fraud. It's just confirmation. Obviously banks have now moved to MFA, multi-factor authentication, and really in terms of bank mandate, I mean, we set the mandate, we tell the banks who can sign and authorize payments. Everything's pretty much done online. I doubt we're issuing checks anymore. So if a fraud is perpetrated that goes beyond the MFA and the acts we've taken, it really falls on the bank if we've done everything we can, if they've allowed it to happen. So I appreciate we need to consider fraud, but I hope within the finance team that effectively we've done everything we can. We're following bank mandate rules, we're following all the practicalities and precautions about using bank mandates and online payment systems. But for the purpose of this, it just copying the same item of text and putting it in answer to that question and to that question, it doesn't actually, it's not a management response. It's just well, that's the way it is. I'd like to see a bit more confirmation of this is what we do, and I appreciate we're not going to publicise exactly how we do it. We're not going to tell fraudsters how to attack the financial processes of this authority, but it's not a concern, it's just an observation that we just need to be, I think, a bit more clear. And if there's something that needs to come back to the audit committee to reassure us of this is the process, it can be done in part 2 if necessary, I think that would be helpful. Thank you, Chair.
I think we're more than happy to take that on board, Chair.
So let's just go to question 51, because this is where the audit committee is asked, how is the audit committee provided with assurance that the arrangements for accounting estimates are adequate? And we're then asked to consider management's responses to questions 40 and 50. So you have to go and look at questions 40 and 50 to see, but I did wonder if in response to that, and picking up the Chief Executive's point and Councillor Sellis's question, whether this is the right place for a narrative around send and the uncertainty. And the question that comes to my mind, colleagues, is whether that is something the committee is able to comment on now, given the statement from the Chancellor of the Exchequer yesterday, or whether it is timely for officers to bring a report to our next meeting. Now, and then I don't know how that then fits in with the budget cycle. So I'm open both to members' views and officer advice on the best way forward. But obviously the point that the Chief Executive makes is the continuing strain on the Council's budget of send. Yesterday was an important junction in the government's financial forecasting, but made no comment about SEND and how it might be dealt with. So there continues to be uncertainty, not just for Devon County Council, but for all councils which have a SEND responsibility. Yeah. And so the question then is whether we are competent enough today to make a decision and recommendation, or whether we want some more detailed report at our next meeting. And I am quite prepared, given the significance of the issue, to convene a special meeting of the committee in order to consider that, because it is probably one of the most hugely significant issues for the council. So before I come to you, Councillor, can I? That's why it's there. So swing. Director of Finance.
Thank you. So the issue around SEND isn't an issue that the committee need to be concerned about in relation to last year's statement of accounts. It's a future issue. So the question about the committee being content with the accounting estimates is relating to the ones that we used in last year's closure of accounts. So things like the valuations, things like the pension fund estimates, the pension liability, things like asset valuations. It's those sorts of estimates. It's not asking you to make a judgment on future budget setting type estimates. And I think probably the next audit committee, we should have an update on the SEND situation as a current risk for the current year. But there's nothing that I'm aware of that affects your ability to sign off these questions from Grant Thornton, or when we come to signing off the accounts at the next committee. But I think an update in parallel with the approval of the statement of accounts will be very helpful for you to have comfort, and for me to have comfort, that the County Council is indeed a going concern, because that will be a key question that will be asked. So I think September, or the next committee, I think probably is September, is probably the right time for us to have that paper. And I'm hoping by then we'll have some more clarity from the government as well, because just saying we'll wait until the autumn is not acceptable for any council, and Devon's not alone. I hope that's helpful, Chair, but happy to take a follow-up question.
That's fine. I've got Councillor Hayward and Councillor Sellis.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Your clarification. Personally, I feel a little bit ill at ease by that, because our chief executive has spoken today and has raised this specific point. If audit and committee considers this in September, we'll be well into the budget cycle, the budget prep. And then if the audit committee has additional concerns or wishes for more information, then that bumps it another 3 months forward. You know, the government has issued its spending review yesterday. And for my part, I appreciate there's officer resource, but this specific item is so significant to this authority. I'd be happier with an extraordinary audit committee report just to receive it. And again, even if that's the case when the government provides its clarity, presuming it does provide its clarity, because it does have form for saying it will do something and then it doesn't actually happen. That's all governments, not just this one. And then we're left hanging, waiting, and everyone is on tenterhooks to find out what the impact is going to be. And then by the time audit committee can review it, assess it, because it will be a significant piece of reading material, we're then another 3 months down the line. And I think that because of its significance and its impact on the authority, I think deferring it till September might not be a great idea.
Councillor Sellis.
That's pretty well what Councillor Hayward was mentioning. Given the uncertainty, I was just seeking clarification on process. Being new to this audit committee, whether we as an audit committee ask questions or whether we submit them to full council. It was just really the process, and I fully agree with what Councillor Hayward was saying. That was pretty well my question.
Okay, and Chief Executive, and then we'll come to a conclusion.
Similar, I just wanted to say that this is obviously a hugely political matter, you know, of national and local importance. And I suppose the question asking the chair today is that, you know, where do we raise that concern right here and now in terms of that announcement, and talking to Democratic Services here, that, you know, even to say that it's the autumn with no clarification, I think is you know, that there needs to be some form of response from us as an organisation to that. I'm not sure where, so I'm looking at technical in terms of how audit links into that, but you know, this is a paper about risk. It is about significant events, and there's a significant event here. So I'm asking the question to what extent there is a political response back to the Minister on this matter, because there is a deadline being set by national government of March next year, that would, you know, put every council into an untenable position on this matter. So this is highly unusual. And I suppose the other concern I have about this is that when we have our budget announcements in December, the opportunity for us to say, do the work, but not know the context we're working within, it would question whether we could actually meet the budget timeline as members in this matter. So you know, I'm just asking, I suppose, that response bit.
So I can guide this. Let's just deal with it in two parts. Let's deal with the agenda item 5, which is the informing of the audit risk assessment. And if I take you to page with the recommendations on, we're asked to note the report and endorse the responses of the Director of Finance and Public Value to the external auditor's questions. Proposal from Councillor Sellis. Is there a seconder? Councillor Morgan seconds. All those in favour? So that bit's carried. So let's then take the next bit of it, which is the question regarding SEND, and the Chief Executive asks, what's the role of audit? Colleagues will know that in our training just recently given, we're asked to leave politics at the door, but it's always good to ignore advice, isn't it? So I'm very clear in terms of the life of the council that the political response comes from the cabinet members, and that's their job. However, audit has a job, and our job, as we recognise, the SEND deficit is probably the single most grievous harm that this council carries, and similarly for some others, but we're not other councils. But for Devon County Council, the SEND deficit is around, in round terms, around about £150 million. We don't balk at that. It's about 150 million. It entirely wipes out our free reserves and more, and is the single biggest risk to the council that has no mitigation, because government, last and this, have done nothing to say whether the current arrangement of effectively having it as a negative reserve carries on, or what they expect us to do. The safety valve, while assisting, does nothing to limit the demand that has to be met by the council. I agree with Councillor Hayward that actually we should have a report, but we shouldn't wait until September. We should do it sooner. We are now June the 12th. So might I suggest that before the end of July, because I don't know what the scale is in terms of writing the report, that makes it worthwhile, but might I suggest that we meet before the end of July as a committee to consider that most grievous issue and what recommendations we might need to make as an audit committee to the cabinet for their concern, or possibly to refer to scrutiny. We've got some options there. All right, does that sound a practical way forward? Yes, I'm going to come to Councillor Hill first and then to the Chief Executive.
So my understanding is that an audit committee essentially ensures that the money is being spent on what it's intended to be spent on. And the question that or the statement that I'm about to make, I think refers more to scrutiny. I was speaking to a parent of a SEND child yesterday who has been failed. In her opinion, and I don't want to give my opinion, but she gave me quite a compelling case. Her child had been failed from primary school all the way up until the age of 20, which he is now, failed by lots of different authorities and agencies in the SEN SEN area, basically. So I think it would be useful for us as an audit committee to refer a lot of things that people are saying about their SEN children to scrutiny, so that we can actually see that the money that we are spending on the agencies that provide these services, that they are providing the service that they claim to be providing. Because the things that she had described to me, she didn't realise it, but I would say that it does touch on areas of fraud and just mismanagement, and it's parents like her and her children that are suffering as a result of this.
That's a really helpful summary, and I suspect many councillors will have not dissimilar accounts from parents with children with special educational need. I'm very clear in my mind that that is outside the scope of an audit committee, but it is within scope of a scrutiny committee. What I would suggest is that we focus on, if you like, the big strategic issue of the financing and the lack of government commentary yesterday in its major financial statement, which impacts on the council's ability to know what it does. When we get to our next meeting at that point before the end of July, if it doesn't include it, I am more than happy that the committee includes a recommendation to scrutiny to consider a work programme to look at the way, for example, SEND operates and the kind of inefficiencies in the system that you have just alluded to. Would that be helpful?
Yeah, your summary was a lot better than my statement.
No, I think it requires us to bring to a table the lived experience, but we have to be mindful about the kind of extent, and we can't have a creeping mission. So I'm going to come to Councillor Morgan, then to Director of Finance.
I was going to say our job as an audit committee is to give assurance, and we can't really give assurance on this aspect, this item at the moment, because of the unknowns and because of the financial situation. So I think your recommendation for us to come back with when we know, or we've got more of a picture of what we can expect, I think that is the eminently sensible way to go, because I don't feel I can give assurance on this as a councillor, as a committee member. So we need to come back and revisit this sooner rather than later.
Director of Finance.
Thank you, Chair. Just to address Councillor Hill's comments about a potential fraud being perpetrated, please, if you can provide myself and or Head of Devon Assurance Partnership the details of that, we will get it looked into. I don't think we can wait until scrutiny. I think we should look at that immediately, but thank you for raising it.
No problem.
Chief Executive, and then we're going to move on.
Just suggesting with my colleague here that you know, we have a cabinet scheduled for the 13th of August. So as you rightly said, in terms of, you know, cabinet being alerted to this in a connection with audit, that I would suggest that you know, what we need to pull together to evidence the financial piece about this and the risk, that we should do that mid-July with an additional audit committee, because I think we should do it before we go into school closure period, in terms of making sure that we get that report here. You know, I'm sure the Director of Finance could still write this report quite quickly because she's so steeped in it, but I think setting out to audit the changes that have been announced linked to the safety valve programme, the review dates and the link to the budget process, we could do that quite quickly.
Well, that's okay with colleagues. Round about mid-July, date to be confirmed. Don't book a holiday, because we're going to do that. However, on a 2-for-1 deal, now we've got that bit sorted and we're going to meet in July. May I suggest to the committee that item 9, the annual governance statement, which is the thing that came out late, is deferred until July, and I gather that won't cause anyone any bother. All right, so is that okay? I guess having a chance. Brilliant, thank you very much. Right, let's go back to the agenda then. Item 6, external audit plan. Yes.
So I would just like to double check that, because I think there's a requirement, is there not, for the annual governance statement to be approved before the commencement of the audit of the statement of accounts. And I think the statement of accounts audit is commencing next week. Can I just double check that? Do you know, Catherine, or not?
I think last year the annual governance statement was in September alongside the statement of accounts. But yeah, external audit is starting next week and the week after. But I understand that AGS went in September last year.
And are Grant
But we
Thornton
can certainly-
content with it going September again or July?
I can certainly
know?
take that away and check.
Okay, it'll be
So
too
we've got
late though,
Grant on
won't
the
it?
phone, but I can take it to the
Okay.
specific directors.
Yeah, if we don't discuss it now, it'll be too late if the audit starts next week.
Well,
But
maybe during the course of the meeting then Grant Thornton can communicate, but the essence of it is this: it was late here, not all colleagues have had time to read it, and I'm not, as chair, going to make a recommendation when people will feel uncomfortable, because that defeats the whole point of audit, doesn't it? The reasons for it being late don't concern us, but it is late. Was there a view? Sorry.
Sorry, Chair, I was just whispering to the Chief Exec that statutory, we just have the requirement to do it once a year as an annual statement. So it complies with a statutory responsibility. Obviously, if it's creating a problem with Grant Thornton, then that's almost a side issue, but we can check that. So statutory, I'm confident that actually, as long as we have effectively reviewed our covenants once a year, we've complied with what we need to do for our legal obligations. So that doesn't create problems from a legal perspective for me, certainly, to put back to July.
All right, thank you. So while that's going on behind the scenes, let's move to item 6, is the external audit plan. And I think Julie is going to lead us on that.
Chair, thank you very much. Good morning, councillors. Just by way of introduction, my name's Julie Mashey. I'm one of the audit directors at Grant Thornton. I'm here at Council Committee today on behalf of Peter Barber, who is your appointed engagement lead for the audit of Devon County Council. Unfortunately, Peter sends his deep apologies. Unfortunately, he's had to attend a close family member funeral today. So I'm just here to support Peter with the presentation of today's audit plan. I'm accompanied by Sam Hardin, who is the Senior Audit Manager for Devon County Council. So Sam will be able to support with any questions as well, as much as we can in Peter's absence. But I'll take you through the high-level messages of the audit plan then, and then open out to questions. Particularly for new committee members, the audit plan looks to set out the overall risk assessment and scope of the audit for external audit for the 24-25 period. Slightly different to what you would probably be accustomed to within a corporate environment. We actually have two principal responsibilities as external auditors. One is the one you're probably more familiar with, which is the audit of the statement of accounts. But we do also have additional responsibilities under the Code of Audit Practice to undertake a value for money assessment of the council, and that looks at the overall arrangements of the council to ensure economy, efficiency and effectiveness in its use of resources. And that VFM assessment covers under sort of 3 core pillars of financial sustainability of the council, governance, and around delivering economy, efficiency and effectiveness. So you'll see reference to both of those areas in the audit plan that's put in front of you. You'll see at the start of the plan we set out some local and national context that's been considered as part of the risk assessment that's informed the plan that you have in front of you today. I will also draw your attention to page 49 of your papers in the plan, which is, I believe, page 10 of the plan page 9 of the plan from our papers, which obviously highlights, as Catherine was mentioning earlier, one of the more significant changes that are happening to the statement of accounts for this year, which is the introduction of the new accounting standard IFRS 16, which is in relation to how the council has to account for its leases. Now, that will result in quite a significant change for many authorities. A number of authorities have carried up until this point a number of leases which are considered off balance sheet, where they will just pay an operating lease rental to a lessor that they are renting a particular type of property or equipment or otherwise. But the new standard recognises that where you have entitlement to the right to use assets, whether you have all of the risk and rewards or not, from now on under the new standard, with some small exceptions for low value and short-term leases, those leases will now come on to the balance sheet of the local authority. And so you may see some significant changes in the overall detail and presentation of what the balance sheet will look like this year compared to previous periods. And so a lot of the work that we will do for all of our local authorities is to understand what the process has been of the council to understand the full complete picture of what leases it's got, and also how it's therefore implemented these new requirements. But just to give you a few sort of headlines out of the plan itself, in terms of our overall risk assessment, we're required to report to you in the plan our significant risks for the audit, and we have identified 3 significant risks, one being management override of controls. It's important to say that this is not a specific risk to Devon. It is a mandatory presumed risk across all audits that we are required to consider the risk that management have overridden controls, and we do specific work around reviewing journals, looking at key estimates and any potential scope for management bias in the way that the accounts have been put together. And there are also 2 other significant risks that we identify in relation to the valuation of land and buildings, and also the valuation of the pensions liability, which are by far the 2 of the most significant balances within the council's balance sheet. It requires a lot of third-party expertise to support the council, both in terms of valuations and also from your own property valuers in terms of valuation of assets. And obviously a number of assumptions are built into those valuations to support the figures in the financial statements. We also have to communicate to you our planning materiality levels. And you'll see the details of the planning materiality levels that we've set out in the plan. Those materiality levels are not fixed, they are kept under review over the course of the audit, and so if there are any additional factors that come to our attention that warrant us revisiting those materiality levels, we will revisit where necessary, and we will provide any updates to those materiality levels in our final audit findings report at the conclusion of the audit. And then just finally, just going back to the value for money side of things, you will see that there are a number of significant risks that we've identified in the context of our value for money work. Now, the vast majority of that relates to findings that were identified as part of the VFM assessment for the council in 23-24, where we've identified significant weaknesses in the previous year. We issue what we call a key recommendation. And we're required under the National Audit Office's guidance for value for money assessments that where we've identified a key recommendation relating to a significant weakness in a previous year, we are formally required to follow those recommendations up as part of our subsequent year's audit. And so you will see that those areas have been flagged in the risk assessment for this year's review. There's a bit more information then in the plan about some of the details of the overall logistics and the timeframes for the audit delivery, and also confirms our independence, and also any details of any other non-audit services, along with our final audit fees in line with the PSAA scale rate fees that they publish following their consultation each year. I'll just refer very quickly to Sam to see if there's any other important points of detail I've missed, recognising I don't work on the Devon audit currently, but Sam, is there any other matters that you wish to highlight?
I don't think so, Julie, other than just sort of briefly touch on logistics. So I think it's been mentioned that we'll be starting our audit in the next couple of weeks with a view to concluding it probably by the end of September or towards the middle of October, depending on, because obviously we can't give the opinion on the council until the pension fund audit's completed. And there are some quite complicated, what we call level 3 investments in those that we quite often need to wait for third party evidence to secure that. But that's the time frame for the audit that we'll be carrying out over the summer.
Thank you, Sam. And just finally, Chair, just picking up on the previous conversation in relation to the annual governance statement, you did sort of mention about seeking our views around that. Just to clarify, the annual governance statement it does form part of the statement of accounts. Now, the council can either publish the annual governance statement as part of the statement of accounts when it publishes its draft for public inspection, or it can also be published separately as an accompanying report, but it is effect part and parcel of the statement of accounts, and we're required to look at that annual governance statement just to read and ensure it's consistent with our understanding of the council as part of the work that we do. So certainly I think committee need to at least have a look at the annual governance statement to make sure they're comfortable with what will be published in draft alongside the statement of accounts, but absolutely recognising the other comments in terms of you will see this annual governance statement again at the conclusion of the audit for a final formal approval, and final signatures obviously will accompany that alongside the sign off of the statutory accounts as well. So we do, as part of our review, often identify further updates and changes that are required to the AGS as part of the audit. So you will see the AGS again at a later committee when that sort of final procedure is finalised. I hope that helps provide a little bit of clarification from an audit perspective.
A bit, but not a lot. So the question was, in terms of the annual governance statement, the committee today was asked to approve the draft governance statement, and all we're seeking to do, because it's come out late, is move that until the middle of July. And what I think I need to know is that doesn't cause some great peril or cliff edge for Grant Thornton. I take it from what you say it doesn't.
It certainly will not require, it certainly won't cause any difficulty in terms of us being able to progress the audit. Where it will cause a difficulty is that the council, obviously, as part of its publication of its draft accounts public inspection, may not therefore be publishing the AGS as part of that. Okay. And so you'll need to make sure there's some commentary on your draft statements that you publish.
So let me be clear, outside of this meeting, I'm going to leave officers to look at why it's late, but members are not going to deal with it today because they've not been given the proper time to read it. That is not a matter for this committee. Officers need to look at that, and Grant Thornton to understand how that happened, but I'm not going to deal with that today. You've assured me that there's no peril to the council of the committee deferring it for 4 weeks. If I'm wrong in that understanding, Grant Thornton need to say no. Otherwise, we're just going to leave it and defer it until next month. Okay. Let's get back to then the item, which was the external audit plan. Any questions from colleagues? So, so if I come to Councillor Sellis, Councillor Morgan and Councillor Hayward.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. It's just clarification. It mentions that details about the council's financial ledger is nearly 30 years old, having limited functionality, and I don't understand that. So when I don't understand things, I ask questions. Is the IT up to scratch?
I think that's one for you, Director of Finance, isn't it?
Happy to come in on this one. So prior to the go live of our new finance system on the 1st of April this year, we used a system called Finest, and it was a 30-year-old system. So the County Council implemented it back in the 90s. And although it's had some upgrades through the years, it is basically 1990s technology. So the statement of accounts that are being prepared at the moment are being prepared on that old system, and it does have limited functionality, although to its credit, it's a very stable and very trustworthy system. So the Grant Thornton are simply raising that they've had issues in the past with the controls and the sign off around some internal journals. So that's just, it's not spending money, it's just moving money from one place to another. But they've had issues with that. We're not able to correct it because the old finance system just couldn't do it the way that Grant Thornton would like the system to approve. Grant Thornton would like the best way of approving a journal is for it to be done inside the system. So one person will input the transactions and somebody else will approve them. And there's a certain type of journal that the system just can't do that. And there's we just weren't able to alter the system. So it was a recognised risk, but not a significant risk. But we have now gone live with the new finance system. But so this is talking about our old 30-year-old system that ceased at the end of March this year.
Yeah. Councillor Morgan.
This is around IFRS 16, the valuation of right of use assets and lease liability. Given that within the value for money section of the audit reports in the past, property valuations has quite often been a sticking point with a lot of local authorities, and there's been some disagreement. As this is new, it's an additional thing that audit is going to have to cover. Do we see this as another potential sticking point at, as far as the council's concerned? Because from what I'm reading of this, it's going to be something that's really quite difficult to do, and in some cases potentially subjective. I don't know if you've got any comments about this, because I just find it's another hoop that we're having to jump through as a local authority, and this is property that we don't even own. Have we got any comments on that?
Thank you. In terms of IFRS 16, in terms of my team, has spent a lot of time, I've got very detailed workings to support this, working closely with colleagues in terms of property valuations, and all those working papers will be shared with Grant Thornton as part of the external audit so they can review. There are details set out in terms of how we should treat leases in the balance sheet, and we've had technical training on how to do that with CIPFES, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, and how we treat those, and have taken external advice where needed. But that will all be reviewed in depth as part of the external audit with the working papers we've prepared.
It's just, it was down as a risk that was identified, and it's something that's new to everybody.
Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 5, some are observations, some are questions. Do you want me to do them one by one and get an answer on each, or just blurt them all out and get answers at the end?
Run through the 5 and
you can work it out as you go.
Well, colleagues will work it out as they go.
No
As they ricochet around the room.
No worries. So I'll use the ModGov reference so everyone knows where we are. So page 55, that's obviously the vertical page numbering. This is significant risks, and the significant risk is the revenue cycle includes fraudulent transactions. Personally, I'm unhappy with the word frowns, because that sort of implies that you're sort of telling off an errant child. The ethical framework frowns on all sorts of fraud as unacceptable. Just put the word considers. I just don't see that word frowns is appropriate. Page 61. We refer to materiality, and there's a reference in there, and it's also repeated on page 62 about materiality for senior officer remuneration. Now, obviously, that's not a subject, the actual individual remuneration to go through, but materiality of £20,000. And it says, given that salaries of senior officers can occasionally be subject to adverse publicity, it's imperative to determine the threshold of error. I think the threshold of error is 0. There should be no materiality. You're paid what your contract says you should be paid. £20,000 is a wage for someone in Devon, and I think I would like to see that addressed, because it just sends a wrong message. It really does. Page 65, we come to related party disclosures, and it was identified that not all members' annual declarations of interest were returned. 2 reminders, and if they were still not returned, the registry of interest was reviewed to ensure completeness. Well, that's just a cop-out for members. If a member doesn't return their RPD, then there should be some censure under the code of conduct, a breach, because you can't just ignore it. You're asked to do it. It's an easy form to fill in. If you don't, it shouldn't be that officers then, oh well, we'll go to the ROI and fill it in ourselves. I'd like to see, and perhaps this isn't something for audit to consider, but it's certainly, we're talking about it here. Page 69, there's reference on here to employee benefits, details of work to be conducted at the interim. This is interim audit work April 25, and this is the interim plan for 24-25. Under employee benefits, it says obtain payroll data for the 12 months ending 31st of March 24. I don't see what relevance that will have to an audit plan for 25, or am I mistaken, because we've already completed that audit? Is that just a typo that was carried over? Again, it might be a very minor thing. And the final one is, you talked about the PSAA fees. I know obviously your fee, Grant Thornton's fees based on the PSSA model has gone up by 10% year on year. within the Devon Pension Fund EAP that we'll talk about in Agenda 8, it's gone up 3%. Is there any reason why there's such a differential? Because inflation for this period was not 10%. And as an authority, we're now paying 10% more for an audit. I just wonder perhaps if you can answer the question why. Thank you.
So while they ricochet around the room, let's just try to run them in order. So Paul, you may just have to remind us the order, but does anyone make a note? You do. Marvellous. Oh, Franz. Okay. Who's going to deal with Franz?
Chair, if I may come in on some of the questions, if that's okay. Obviously, the wording that's been used in the report is obviously our word, so I certainly reflect on the councillors' comments, and we're happy to revisit that word if that's of particular concern. But really all we're trying to highlight is that, in the context of fraud, the culture within local authorities in terms of, you know, a good operating authority with good checks and balances. Normally we would expect that framework, and indeed we've certainly not had any experience with this council in the past in terms of any concerns around fraud. That would need us to do specific work in relation to fraud and revenue recognition. But we're more than happy to revisit the word and change it to something else, Chair.
Do you need a prompt on the next questions, or did you make a note?
No, I think I've got a note on pretty much all of them.
You rattle on.
Yeah, so the senior officer materiality matter. Councillor, you're absolutely right. Our expectation is that those disclosures, and indeed all disclosures in the account, should be accurate. The 20,000 lower limit. What we're trying to do is set an overall materiality in terms of what do we think would affect a stakeholder or reader of the account in terms of materially changing the views of a reader. So this would be the threshold that we would look at in terms of qualifying the overall opinion of the accounts of the authority should they not choose to adjust for such an item. So obviously our overall materiality for the audit is 31 million. We obviously don't want to operate at that level of materiality for a very specific disclosure, and so that's why we've set this lower level. So it's not to say that we won't conduct work for disclosures below that 20,000. We will do full work that we need to on this senior officer remuneration note. What this is trying to highlight is 20,000 is the upper threshold that we would tolerate in terms of something being wrong before we would qualify the accounts. But ultimately, we would expect the authority to adjust all items where we identified errors in relation to the senior officer note. That's the second one. The third one in terms of the
Julie, you won't have seen it. Thank you. Just hold that there because the chief executive would like to make a comment. So we'll come back to you, Julie. Thank you.
Just to say, I spent quite a bit of time with the Director of Finance looking at this report, so I suppose it's just feedback in that way in the context of materiality. I think, you know, what I was advised is that was good news in terms of that materiality page, in terms of, you know, the difference between last year and this year. And I think for audit, there's a bit about very difficult looking at this, just like the councillors' questions, to try and understand what is a positive progress point for us as an organisation, such as that increase in materiality. And just as a question on this matter, is this a national benchmark type of figure of this is an issue for Devon? So I'm using that materiality page to actually kind of raise my concern in being briefed on this, that it doesn't quite evidence to I would say the non-expert auditor, or indeed, you know, to the public, that on that page alone that there's something that's more a kind of national type benchmark, and there's another materiality that shows a good positive progress piece for Devon. So I'm just raising that to ask if is that because that's the way that this is produced by your organisation, or is there any possibility in the future to be able to evidence just that understanding? I needed quite a briefing on to get from the Director of Finance, and in terms of members being able to look at this I don't know if they've had the same issues, but it's interesting we're looking at this page.
Chair, if I may come back. So we can absolutely reflect on the level of narrative and explanation we give to set out our justification as to what our materiality levels have been set at. It is an auditor judgment, and this is trying to give an overall view as to recognising either the risk profile of the organisation or other inherent risk factors, which could be a combination of local and national considerations. What would effectively influence any sort of economic decisions of users of the accounts. So that's the overall. Well, there's a definition on page 61 that sort of tries at the bottom of 61 that sort of sets out the sort of national context as to what materiality is defined as in accordance with the standards. But fundamentally, in terms of the change to materiality, as you probably know, you may know that as an audit firm, all of our audits are subject to external review by our regulators on a regular occasion, and materiality levels in terms of the national thresholds that we apply for public sector audits. The view of the regulators were that those are comparatively low compared to other audit firms, and therefore we should consider revisiting that in light of some of the benchmarking that they have done of our national sort of benchmarks that we typically tend to use. Now, obviously, those national benchmarks are only a starting point, and then we will obviously look at a range of factors then between different authorities as to whether there are additional elements of risk that will then reduce that even further. So yes, the overall increase is a good increase in terms of it reduces somewhat the level of testing that we have to complete at your organisation, but that it was principally linked to a national review rather than any local factors.
Brilliant, thank you for that. And shall we nip back to the questions of Councillor Hayward and then we can move on? Thank you.
Sure. So I might just come to Sam just to confirm the one on the interim order. I think that is a typo, Sam, in terms of reference to 2024, but can you confirm?
Yeah, apologies, we'll amend that in our.
Yeah, we'll make sure to amend that. And then just coming back to the final question on PSA fees, I'm just finding the page. So my understanding is that the reason for the change in the scale fees for the county council is it's linked to the, sorry, I'm trying to find the page. It's linked to the ISA 315 fee. So as you can see in the prior year, the ISA 315 fee didn't form part of the core scale fee. It was a new auditing standard in previous years, and so PSAA didn't have enough information at that point to be able to build that into their scale fee estimates for local authorities. Now that they've been through one audit cycle with local authorities, they have now incorporated that variation fee into the core scale fee for the current year. So you'll see that is part of the increase in the scale fee from previous years. It's just they've now embedded ISA 315 into the core scale fee. And the other aspect is then just an inflationary increase that they have applied as well as part of their annual review of those scale fees. So I think those are the two contributing factors to the change in scale fee. The difference for the pension fund is just the ISA 315 impact for a pension fund is much smaller than that for a local authority. That is my understanding of the change.
And thank you. And there was just one, but I'm not sure if it's entirely for you, Julie, or colleagues in the room, but it was about the related party disclosure and some councillors not completing. Not that Councillor Hayward and I do our homework together, but I made a note. And then the question I ask is, I think the audit committee ought to ask it, are there any current county councillors who clearly served in the previous council who have not completed and returned the necessary declaration? So I don't think that's a question of names in the room, but it might be a question whether there are or whether there aren't.
Yeah, Chair, sorry, I might want to refer that question to officers. Obviously, we looked at this at the point in time of the audit, but I don't have the latest detail as to how the council has progressed with ensuring those declarations are done.
That's fine, Julie, but I think Councillor Hayward makes a good point. It's a relatively simple form. It comes out and members ought to be, and clearly, you know, there may be a point of exhaustion, but it can't be members who choose not to do it when it's part of an audit process. So
just to confirm, Chair, no members have not completed and there's none, obviously, that have returned that haven't completed. To give you that assurance.
All right, brilliant. So we're reassured by that, and thank you. So let's go to the recommendation, which was simply that we note the report. And are we content to note? Is there a proposer? So Councillor Sellis will propose, Councillor Morgan will second, and are we content? Collectively, we are. Anyone not content? That's brilliant. Thank you very much. So we'll bank that win, and we're going to go to item 7, which is a Devon pension fund, which starts at page 95, and that's the Assistant Director. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So agenda item 7, so this is very similar to agenda item 5, so informing the audit risk assessment for 24-25, but this is for Devon Pension Fund rather than the County Council. So in terms of the covering report, it's very similar. So this is, again, part of the auditor's risk assessment procedures to attain an understanding of management processes and the pension fund's oversight of the same areas which were set out in item 5. So again, this is a long list of questions of about, so 50 questions or so. And this, as with the other report, the committee is asked to consider whether those responses from management are consistent with its understanding, whether any further comments to make. In terms of this item, I didn't have any specific questions I wanted to highlight or mention, but I'm happy to take any questions or see if we can answer them within the room, and questions received in advance I hopefully will be able to answer, Chair, that you've submitted.
Thank you. Any questions from colleagues? Okay, so I just have one, which is page 113. It's question 37, and the question asks, are management aware? But the response is the fund is not aware, but management aren't the fund. For the sake of clarity in our work, we shouldn't confuse the two, should we? So can I be clear, if a question asks, are the management aware, how do we, is that a slip, or does it need to be changed so we're clear what management are saying?
I think this may just be a case where it's not been consistent wording used, because typically the Devon County Council will be prepared first, and then we will take a lot of the same answers will be used for the pension fund as well. So I've spoken to our head of investments, who said he's happy he will amend this so that it's consistent throughout, that it's the pension fund.
Thank you very much. So any questions? Is there anything we haven't asked that we should have done? Not a trick question,
no,
but you're the experts.
As well, this is to inform us as the risk assessment for Grant Thornton, so it's extra information for them. So no, I'm happy.
Brilliant. Okay. Now, Chief Executive is going to be our Auditor in Chief.
Just because of materiality, I think it's important that we all understand that. So I just wonder, in terms of it as a headline, just wondered if we could have an explanation of that all of us I'd understand back to that bit of to what extent it's local and to what extent it's national, because
so I think you might just need to help us by just referring to the page you're on.
I'm on the
then we can
guidelines on the report, on the actual audit report, page 10, but it's that headline of materiality. And the reason I asked the question as well is there've been significant, I wonder if we could get a comment on the McLeod judgment, which has been a significant event and outcome in the last couple of years. I just wonder if we could get a commentary on that, so members are aware on both materiality, local and national, and the McLeod judgment in terms of a more kind of what would say a layman's explanation of that. Thank you, or laypersons.
Are you on the next agenda item? You're on item 8. Yeah, there are two reports. I love the keenness, absolutely, to be admired. Right, so let's just knock off agenda item 7. Is everyone is everyone happy? Yeah, okay. And so we're going to assume that Councillor Sellis has proposed and Councillor Morgan has seconded, and we're all content. For the sake of the record, thank you very much. Let's move happily to item 8. Julie, would you like to introduce it? But you've been forewarned on one question, so you might like to deal with materiality and what you've got to say.
Yes, of course. More than happy to. Thank you, Chair. So Yes, so this is the audit plan for Devon Pension Fund. Just by way of additional introductions, again, apologies, Beth Bowers, who is the engagement lead for the pension fund, is unfortunately on annual leave this week. So I'm just again substituting for Beth, who will be back with committee at the next meeting. But I also have with me Krista. Krista is the audit manager for the pension fund as well, and Krista will be able to support on any specific questions should the need arise. But in terms of the structure of the plan, it's very similar to that we've also talked through in the council. Probably the only difference I would highlight is in relation to the responsibilities in relation to value for money. In the context of pension funds, we are required as part of the wider value for money assessment for the council, consider the governance arrangements in place in terms of its role as administrative authority for the pension fund. So there's no separate VFM section in this plan because there's no separate VFM assessment for pension funds nationally, but we do pick up pensions governance arrangements as part of our governance review for the council. So you'll see that featured in our auditor's annual report for the council as a whole when that work is concluded. But just to again pick up the sort of key highlights in relation to the key risks to the audit, I'll draw you to page 136 of your papers, which identify the significant risks to the audit. As I mentioned with the previous paper, management override of controls is a presumed mandatory risk across all audits, so that significant risk continues into this specific audit as well. And the second one is around the evaluation of level 3 investments. Now, just to give a little bit of context to members, the pension fund as a whole carries about 5.9, I think, from about 5.9 billion pounds worth of varying types of investment assets that it obviously manages and administers to seek returns for its membership. The nature of those investments are very different in terms of what the fund holds in line with its investment strategy, and some of those from both an officer and from an audit point of view are more easy to value and to audit than others. So there is 3 levels of categorization of investment held within the pension fund accounts in accordance with the fair value hierarchy. Your level 1 investments are the very easy to value and measure ones, which are those that are publicly published on a stock exchange, on a FTSE or whatever, that you can easily get a daily price, you know, with a few clicks onto Bloomsbury or ft.com, so they're very easy to verify. Whereas your level 3 investments are much more complex investments, and that can include things like infrastructure funds, and some of the more sort of bespoke type funds that often you would have to rely on management estimation. We normally will need to either use market-based indices or rely on audited accounts for those individual funds to be getting some form of assurance over the basis and price of those valuations that are put into the pension fund account at the end of the year. So it's a complex area, needs more estimation, more assumptions involved, and so has a lot more scope for management bias and subjectivity. So that's why that has been highlighted as a significant risk area. The materiality for the audit, just picking up the chief executive's question there, that equates to 1.3% of your gross investment assets. Now, our benchmarks for our pension funds typically tend to range between 1 and 2% of overall gross investment assets for the fund. Now, 1.3%, just because that's on the lower end of that range, doesn't necessarily flag a higher risk profile of your council. It's a little more complicated than that, insofar as we as auditors for the pension fund also have to provide assurances to all of the audit teams and auditors for all of the individual employers of the Devon Pension Fund. So Devon County Council is obviously a key employer, but you have all of the Devon districts and many other smaller authorities. And so if you were to apply their share of the total pension fund assets, if we were operating at a materiality level far greater than and didn't take into account the individual needs of the audit teams and audit firms of those smaller entities, we could be auditing at far too high a level to provide the right level of assurance to those audit firms in accordance with the NAO audit working and collaboration protocol. So we have to make sure that we set our level at appropriate level, that actually it will give the necessary level of assurance to those smaller employers as well as Devon County Council individually as part of the County Council's audits. So that will vary each year depending on what the needs of those individual employers and employer audit teams require. So hope that addresses the question. There's a little bit more then in terms of the audit logistics. The audits for the pension fund, very similarly to the county council, will start in the next couple of weeks. It's important we get that pension fund audit up and running as quickly as we can to make sure that we can conclude our work to provide all that assurance to all those other audit teams so that they can finalise their audits of the individual employers. So it's we always prioritise the work of the pension fund to make sure that is not unduly holding up any other audit work elsewhere. And finally, we confirm our independence. You'll see that we've set out our assessment of independence. And again, as the questions previously highlighted, we also set out details of the audit fees at the back of the report as well. So I'll hold it there, Chair, and open up for any other specific questions.
Thank you very much, Julie. Colleagues, questions? Content? Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. Again, apologies. I don't want to come across as the councillor who just goes through everything with a Sharpie marker. But just for the purposes of veracity, page 144 in your report, which is your approach to materiality, you just touched on it. You've missed a naught out. It's not 81 million. It says 8.1 million. So
yes, thank you for highlighting that, and we have already corrected that one, councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chief Executive.
Just as a responsibility as head of paid service to represent colleagues and across these organisations, I ask for just clarification on the cloud remedy in terms of there's a national implementation. It says by end of August 2025, and I wonder if there could be a comment in terms of, we know that we've had colleagues who are waiting for this to be resolved between 2 and 3 years. So I just wondered if there's a comment in terms of where the McLeod remedy is nationally across the board benchmarking and then linked into Devon.
So before you answer, can I just check? I admire the slipping in, but is that a question for audit, or is it a question for the pension committee? I don't mind it being dealt here, but it's interesting, you know.
I think it's an important context in terms of staff working in these organisations, and that's why I'm raising it as task. But I'll go to my colleague to answer your question directly, but I just think it's an important context from staff.
Chair, I think you may be correct that this is a question for pensions, but I think the context does cross-link into how we do what we need to be doing for audit purposes.
I don't mind it being asked, but I'm very used to colleagues, as in councillors, slipping in associated questions. I'm intrigued by chief executives doing it, and it entertains me. But Julie, could you answer the question? Would that be all right? McLeod judgment.
I was going to say, Chair, I don't have the details to answer this question, I'm afraid. So I will need to take that one away.
Thank you very much. But if you're going to reply to the chief exec, could you make sure, or I'll ask the chief exec to make sure that the reply is shared with members of the committee as well. And
yes, of course.
We'll be informed. Councillor Sellis.
Thank you. Will the officers be staying on for the end of the meeting? It was just the issue that I raised with you. Yeah, they will. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much for that. All right, so let's go back then to the question, which is Audit Committee Notes Report, proposed and seconded by Councillor Morgan, proposing, Councillor Sellis seconding, I think. Are you happy, Joe? Marvellous. Are we all in favour of noting it? Marvellous. John, brilliant. So let's move on then. We've moved item 9 to July. Item 10 is the Internal Audit End of Year Report on page 163. Item 10, isn't it? Yep. 9's moved, 8's done, 9's moved, we're on to 10. Yeah, that's all right. Who's leading on the internal audit report? Tony. Ah,
I'll
my
do that, Chair.
apologies, Hannah. Please, if you would.
So just for the purpose of the committee, I'm Hannah Hellier. I'm the Senior Assurance Manager with Devon Audit Partnership, and I cover internal audit. So I'm just going to take you through agenda item 10, which is the internal audit report for the year ending 24-25. The committee is asked to consider and review the overall assurance opinion and the performance of Devon Audit Partnership during the year and the outcomes of the work completed. So I just wanted to highlight on page 167, within the second paragraph there, the ongoing positive engagement from staff within the council. Within the third paragraph, within the introduction, we have highlighted that within children's services, we've consistently found the control framework ineffective, and this has also been evident in work that we've carried out across the council. Paragraph 4, we've just highlighted that we're in the process now of undertaking our follow-up work on SEND. The results of this will be reported to the next audit committee in September. And in paragraph 5, again, we just wanted to highlight that we've seen a good level of improvement from our follow-up work within the IT space. On page 168, the government internal audit standards, they changed from April 2025, and we are working towards these. An assessment was undertaken on us last year, which we passed, and we will bring updates both to this committee and the DAP board throughout the year. Page 169 gives our overall assurance rating for the year, and you will see that we have split this. So for the council overall, we have given reasonable assurance, apart from children's services, where again, based on the work done, we have given limited assurance, and that is the same as we gave last year. Just wanted to bring out on page 170. So this is our overall assurance map for the year, and this is based on the work that we've completed, and this plots our work against the 3 lines of defence model. Then want to go down to page 172. This highlights the initial priorities that were agreed for the 24-25 year. They're highlighted in orange, and the revised priorities throughout the year are highlighted in yellow, and they were brought back to each audit committee throughout the year. And then I'll just go down to page 175 onwards. This provides a summary of the findings for all the work that has been completed. As this is our end of year report, most of this work has been brought to audit committees throughout the year. So I don't intend to go through each of those individually because they have been discussed, but I'm happy now to take any questions.
Thank you. And I think I'll just remind colleagues that if you get to 175, you're reading really a summary of work that's already come to the committee previously. I think it's important just to reflect on that, because obviously you're inheriting a past programme. I think it's hopeful to have the reassurance both from the officer and from me. I was on the committee for about 7 months prior to May. You know, that what you're reading there is past work. So it's helpful to go to the start of the report, isn't it? Can I just start, if I may? Some of the work that was due to be done is slipped into 25-26, and I thought from my lay point of view, actually quite a lot had been moved. Is there a reason for it? And does that impact on the work you have planned to do next year anyway?
No, so there has been some movements throughout the year, and that's what we'd expect because our plan is agile. So when the plan's put together, we start to put the plan together around about November, December time to bring to audit committee in February for approval. We know at that point in time that when we discuss this with the senior leadership teams, that there will be changes. So the plan is agile and changes as priorities change. So for instance, there has been a couple where they have been put into 24-25 because new things have emerged throughout the year. Sorry, 25-26, I do apologise. Things have emerged throughout the year which are higher risk. So in order to be able to undertake that work, some work that have now deemed lower priority will be moved into 25-26. Again, there will be some areas where we were going to do some work, but unfortunately service area wasn't quite ready for us. They're still putting things in place. So again, it's moved. So although it might look like there's a lot moved, there has been a lot that's come on the plan throughout the year as well. So it does balance itself out.
Thank you for that. I appreciate the reassurance. I wanted then to take colleagues to page 183, and this is about vacancies in our children's homes. So in essence, earlier in the agenda, there was reference to a very small number of children, young people in unregistered homes. But on page 183, we read that we have homes which have vacancies which are understaffed. I just want to sure I understood that rightly, because I'm not sure if this is an audit question, but very clear it's a use of resource, and what inquiries the audit partnership, Devon Audit Partnership, may have made in terms of understanding the council's journey to ensure that obviously best value would be having our own home staffed and children in there rather than the risk of them being unregistered. So it may not be a question for you directly as an insurance manager, but I think it's an appropriate question in the committee because it may want to make a recommendation elsewhere, having picked it up. So I'm not sure who's going to answer it. It may not be you. Well, apart from any of you who've made any inquiry on it. So is there, or is that something a chief officer would like to get back to us on?
Chair, I can give you an answer if that's helpful. So it's a complex picture. So the issue for placing.
Julian, can I just hold? It's my fault entirely. I've assumed just for the benefit of the tape and the.
Sorry, apologies.
I've posed that question to Julian Worcester, who's the interim director of Children's and Young People's Services.
Yeah.
And Julian, please answer.
Yes, and just for the record, I'm the statutory director of Children's Services for the council, which is obviously an important element. The challenge around provision is quite complex. So it's about matching needs of the young person with the capacity of the unit. So there's quite a key requirement to meet those needs in terms of those units. And that's quite a requirement from Ofsted as well of the inspection of the individual provision. So one of the challenges we have is in Devon is finding provision which can meet a range of children's needs in terms of that complexity. That's something we are discussing with Cabinet and obviously my new lead member around some of those issues and the work we need to do in that space. So we review our provision on a regular basis. We have an overview of where the children are. There's a weekly meeting to look at children's needs, particularly those who are not in registered provision and what we're doing about them. I can give you the assurance that over the last few months, those numbers have come down significantly and we've been working hard on those. It's not an area Ofsted identified in the full inspection as an issue, particularly in terms of registered or unregistered provision. What they did raise was the issue about having sufficiency of provision more generally in Devon, which isn't just what the council provide, but also what our colleagues in the private and voluntary sector provide. That's a long answer to a very specific question, but hopefully gives you some context.
It's very helpful, and I'm mindful that the wider inquiry is more appropriate for children's scrutiny.
Yeah.
But as an audit committee, we ought to be asking the question about why we have homes which are underutilised and children or young people in unregistered spaces. And I think that was the question, and I think you have answered that.
Yeah.
I'm going to move to Councillor Hayward, who wants to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to ask a similar thing. I suppose it's when we're challenged, members, as to what the audit committee does, and are we just there to sort of rubber stamp reports or actually ask inquisitive questions and challenge and do what audit and governance should do? So on page 182, you refer there to the difference in price between an unregistered placement of 12,798 per week. And from anyone looking on the outside, that's a huge figure, £13,000 a week per placement, as opposed to £6,000 a week for an off-framework registered care placement. And to come back to the chair's point, you know, that's equal to about £335,000 a year per placement. So you know, that is, again, perhaps it's not the place of audit to decide how we do it. That's for child services and yourself and your officers. But from an audit perspective, we have to have an insight. We have to have an interest in as to how we're spending £330,000 per placement per annum. You know, almost it comes back, beggars the point. And I'm, you know, I'm on children's scrutiny, and we haven't yet met, is, you know, just pay the staff, poach the staff, get our homes
The
populated.
point is well made.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's probably two points. One is that the care market is broken nationally. So some of the challenges you're referring to, and I don't disagree with those, are a national problem. There are just particular issues in Devon, which I've sort of touched on already, which we need to address as a matter of urgency. And just to give committee context, we spend £98 million annually on care placements. Okay, so this is a big figure, and it's not, you know, it's not massively out of sync with other authorities. I think the question for audit is, are we getting value for money out of that provision? And globally, I can tell you we're not. Okay, just to be really clear about that, we're not getting the right provision, which makes changes both in terms of costs, but importantly, what's the outcomes for the children? And that's what we are inspected on, and that's the concern from Ofsted, is that the provision we are using is not delivering the outcomes we need in terms of children progressing into adulthood, or actually, you know, helping us return the children to home, get them in employment, educational training, all those sort of issues. Now, just to be clear, there are some really good provision in that context, but overall, it's not working to the market we need to do, and that's something which we are talking to Cabinet about as the new administration, about how we can fast track that and make significant changes to that position. And to be clear, that's something all authorities are doing. Even outstanding authorities have got some of these challenges as well in that space. And you'll know from history about National Audit Office have been looking at this in terms of challenging the Department for Education in this space as well. So there's quite a lot of information in this space.
I think that's really helpful. I mean, as this is even like the first committee of our new term, I wouldn't want the committees to be the quiet receivers of reports. I think the entertaining inquiry, and I mean entertaining as in, you know, the right sense of that word that Councillor Hayward makes, is why, how, use of resource is the right space for the committee to be in. And I like the answer, which is about, obviously it's, you know, 98 million, it's about outcomes for children, which it absolutely is, and that may well be more an issue for children's scrutiny and the cabinet members for children's services, but I think our space is to be asking about the use of resource and to understand that, and I welcome, you know, your frankness in saying to us, it's 98 million, is it all used well? My word, not yours. No, but in the wider national picture, and I'm really pleased that the question from Councillor Hayward has brought that positive response, as in opened up a conversation. I think it's really good. I'm going to come to Councillor Morgan.
Thank you for the report. I'd just like to say that this is obviously a snapshot of the council from the last known report, which in some cases could be over a year ago. What I think would be very useful for us as an audit committee would to be able to see the direction of travel. So, for example, on each bit of the summary of the audit reports and findings, we have a little section that says where it was previously, a year ago or 2 years ago. Because, for example, if something is now got reasonable assurance, we might think resting on our laurels over that. But in the past, if it had substantial assurance, that's an area of the organisation that is losing assurance. And I think we as an audit committee need to be able to see that. If we're going to make recommendations to Cabinet or the rest of the council, we need to be able to say, this area has shown a dip, this area has not improved or not got better. And I think for us as an audit committee, we need to see where the highs and lows are happening, not just where it is now or where it is at the last report, but where it was previously, so we can see where it's come from. If it's something that's got better, so if it started off with no assurance, it's now got limited assurance, we know we're on the right direction of travel. But I can't go back to look at previous reports. There's plenty to deal with here, but it would be very, very useful if we could have on the summaries for each report where we were previously and where we've come from and where we're going. If that could be possible, please.
Well, that's really helpful, and I think it picks up some of the conversation earlier about a sort of top level summary. I think there's a response likely to come while we just.
Hello, I'm Jo McCormick, the Deputy Head of Devon Assurance Partnership. I'll just come in on that point, and it is a very good question. What you'll find is some of our work we don't revisit lots of times, especially if it's a substantial assurance and it's not sort of a key financial system of the authority. But where our work is, where we are revisiting, we can show that direction of travel, and we have done that in the past. Reports have moved on, and that has sort of come away. But that is something that we can be showing in our reports if the committee would like us to do that. And that's especially important for work where it has achieved a limited or a no assurance opinion in the past.
I'm taking it we would.
I would
Yes.
very much like to see.
We
where
need
we
not
were.
spend longer debating. Thank you very much, both for raising it and for the offer. It's accepted. Thank you. Councillor Sellis.
Yes, thank you. I refer to page 176 in the block agenda. At the bottom there, the transformation safeguarding benefits realisation, and I'm just highlighting that there's an increase in staff absences. I don't know who's the right person to ask around the table, but has anybody any information about the sickness absence and any update, please? Because we, obviously as councillors, we've got a duty of care for employees.
Thank you for your question. So that's in relation to adult services, so it's not across the whole authority. That's at the time of our audit. That's what we found. We haven't done any follow-up work on to quantify what that is like now. So I would say it's for the service to come back and give the audit committee an update on where we are with those stats now for adult services, if that's okay.
Because I mean, it might have been that there'd been just a bug going around or something like
So
that.
the Chief Executive got a hand up, and I think we may avoid the cost of having a report coming, because I think we may get a more immediate.
Yeah, there were a number of change programs were happening at the time, and we have been focusing on what we call productivity flow and making a lot of changes, transformation, improvement. So, we've reflected back at that time. What I can say to you is that the Director of Adult Social Care, in response to that, has now got a very focused engagement programme with staff, with managers. See them going out with charts every day at the moment. So we've got in response to that, we're directly engaging with staff, talking about the changes more, and working through some of the issues. So, I think it's good sometimes to be honest about the fact that when we implement a lot of change and processes, that there can be a reaction to that, but we need to learn from it and get it right. And I'm assured at the moment that the director and the team are doing that more direct engagement with staff in localities across Devon to address this issue, and we were happy to supply to people ongoing statistics about this area in light of what was previously noted about how are things improving.
And just a quickie, is the IT working okay? Because that can really distress employees when the IT doesn't work. There have been problems in the past, and I'm just wondering whether they've been resolved.
In terms of the work in adult social care, a lot of locality work taking place, and it's making sure that across those locality teams that we have the right supports in place, because in adult social care delivering a service. You know, some people are very connected in through IT systems, some not, a range of roles. So I think going out into the localities and finding out what the particular issue is and how we can improve that is really important, because it's different in different places. And the information I've had back from the Directorate, because we're working on that closely together as we, you know, prepare for all the information that comes in as we self-evaluate towards the CQC inspection, then I'm not hearing that IT is a particular issue. But that you will see information on this as the Scrutiny Committee for Adult Social Care looks closely at the CQC and self-evaluation.
Thanks, because obviously if there are glitches there, that affects the cost of it, doesn't it? Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. And I've just got one question before we go to the recommendations. It relates to something that's on page 177. And this comes to, I think, the point about how assured we can be. So on page 177, service consultation, where it says there's a lack of up-to-date legal knowledge. Elsewhere in the agenda, of course, we are assured that legal is all up to date, has subscriptions to journals, uses appropriate external legal expertise and all the rest of it. So my question is, should the committee be assured or be concerned?
Thank you, Chair. No, the committee can be assured. So this was at a particular point in time and related to a specific closure. But no, you can be assured that the level of assurance is there.
Chair, I am happy to back that, and I think that was a.
No, it's absolutely. You've got external validation. That's absolutely fine. We're going to crack on. That's wonderful. Thank you.
But moment in time.
So we're going to move to the recommendations, colleagues, but I'm going to add one to it. So on page 163, the committee reviews and considers the overall assurance opinion. I think we've done that. Members review and consider the performance of Devon Assurance Partnership during the year. I think we've done that, and I think we are satisfied. That members review and consider the outcomes of the work completed, and we have done that insofar as we are, and maybe we should note it, we are inheriting a year's worth of work that members wholly may not have been familiar with themselves, but have had the chance to read that. The important issue was picked up about sickness absence in adult services. We've heard both from colleagues in terms of that might be picked up when we next revisit it. We've heard from the Chief Executive on that. I think if committee is so minded, we, as in the committee, should write to the Cabinet Member for Adult Services and ask for his confirmation of what has happened and has it improved on sickness absence. So as in looking at then and looking at now, and then he can write to us. Yeah, that will entertain him for 5 minutes, won't it? You know? Yeah, we agree with that. A proposer, I'm happy to propose those 4 recommendations. Did you get the last one? Brilliant. Is there a seconder? Councillor Hill is seconding. Are we all agreed? Job done. Thank you very much. Let's then move to item 11, which is the SEND transformation programme. Now, Councillor Denise Bickley, who's the Cabinet Member, sends apologies for that. I should have said that earlier. And the lead officer is Kelly, so I'm not quite sure. I'm squizzing around now.
I think I'm leading off, Chair.
Wonderful and welcome and nice to see you.
Yes, so thank you, members. The report that you've got in front of you follows on actually from the previous item around one particular area of improvements and audit around SEND, which was looking at the SEND processes and actually our financial controls within SEND. So this is a historic report from November last year, which found that there was no assurance at the time within certain areas of the SEND process environment, notably around the way that we tracked individual placements and when they ended, the fragmentation around some of the financial assurance on that, some of the documentation, issues around some of the data quality and gaps in delegation and approval. Now, each of those were issues that actually were historic issues that we discovered as a service, but we were very keen, and I think the assurance process we went through to get that independent assurance to track where some of those issues were. And this is part of the wider SEND transformation programme that's been going on in the background. This report then sets out what we've done about that, because the inherent challenge was that we couldn't just let that lie. Very clearly, there was a need for urgent action. And what's happened over the last 4 or 5 months is a fairly swift movement to try and rectify and renew some of those core processes. So around financial controls, for example, we have very quickly moved on the advice of DAP colleagues to put in place a single purchase order system and to move towards single audit controls with some of our contractors. We've also sought where we can to move away from legacy arrangements on contracting, which was a big issue for us when we entered the system. We have and we are working on a series of improvements which are linked, as the Director of Finance mentioned earlier on, to Unit 4, the new finance system, to ensure that we've got a very clear line of sight within the finance system for every transaction that goes through. And we are using a system called Capital One that sits alongside that allows us to do per child tracking alongside some of the financial tracking, which previously was very difficult. One of the biggest changes we've made is that following this report, we immediately suspended the existing scheme of delegation for officers and introduced a much stronger and a much harder scheme of delegation within the SEND environment, whereby all financial decisions of any value had to be put through a senior officer approval panel. Now, that is a temporary measure that we are working on, and it was actually linked to a restructure. But what it has allowed us to do is it's meant that every decision that goes through was assigned an end date. There was an understanding of the provision. There was an ability for us to check all of the details of that and actually to be much clearer as an operational service about what we were getting in terms of value for money. Minor changes around the edges to that as well. Data integrity, joint working around elimination of core data systems where there was overlap so that we had one source of the truth, because a big part of the findings of the partnership was around the fact that there was multiple sources of truth in that part of the organisation. Now we're working towards single system. Also, approval, retention and storage of single data records. So for every young person that we had, often there would be 3 or 4 different areas where those data records were stored. There would often be different data records for individual teams. This is back in November. We've moved very quickly, or we're moving very quickly, to an environment in which there is one source of data and one source of storage, to allow officers to be able to very clearly identify what we've got, where we are, and retrieve that if we require it. There was a part to this, though, that we have been looking at quite closely, which is the retrospective audit and correction. So when we did the formal review, and when colleagues from DAP did the formal review, we found that there were a number of errors in the actual system itself back in November. A small team was put in place to deal with that, and we've been back through the records. Around 80% of those are factual inaccuracies, but actually weren't audit or assurance critical. They just needed to be sorted out, mostly around things like end dates on contracts that were missing from the system, but actually around 10% of those were items that we had to go and do a bit of an investigation into, mainly around quality of data and just assuring that actually what was on the system was correct and they have been rectified. We had about 10%, so about 100 to 150 records, maybe more like 5 actually in the end, whereby there were some inaccuracies in the system, and we have gone through a process where we've identified those into 3 batches. Areas where we are going to actively pursue some action or are seeking to, because the supplier involved, there was an issue, whether deliberately or accidentally, and that is a question of judgment in a few of these cases. About 30% where it was actually it was just an accident, and often it tended to be things like double invoicing, whereby suppliers immediately notified us and then we were able to rectify it. And about 35% where actually it was data error which nobody had enacted. So it was normally an error on the system, but actually it hadn't led to any serious condition for us. We are at the moment working through that, and we've got some recommendations that have gone forward about what we do with the most egregious of those. There are about 10 suppliers that we are talking to around that. Part of the challenge with that is the risk profiling of those. Often they tend to be providers that are working with us around 50 to 100 children, and we're talking 1 or 2 placements where there's inaccuracies. There is that whole question about how do we work with individual providers to get the right outcome in terms of rectifying those challenges. That is being taken forward at a senior management level at the moment, and we're happy to do that. The thing I would say is that this is an interim report. We are working towards a September deadline on a lot of these recommendations just because of the way that the academic year works. Happy to take questions on where we are, but we are currently in a discussion around a next round review of this area, and hopefully we'll be bringing back a much happier assurance report with a slightly different colour on it, I'm hoping, in September, which will allow us to talk about some of the work that's been put in place. And I may just pause there if that's okay.
Well, it's very okay if you pause there. That's very helpful. Thank you very much. We'll come to members. Councillor Hill.
Yeah, thank you Councillor Hill. Thank you for the explanation that you've just given, and it sings very closely to the conversation that I had with a particular parent yesterday, where it appears obvious to me that certain providers are being paid for services that they are simply not providing. I don't want to go into details in this meeting, but I would like to speak to you personally about this afterwards to just get some assurances for me that I can then pass on to her, that things, it might be too late per her child, but I think her main concern is that the system was broken and it is being repaired. I'd just like to speak to you about this after this meeting.
Can I just offer a word of advice? Yes. I'm more than happy that you speak with the officer after the meeting. What I would suggest, though, is that you follow that with an email which sets out the facts and circumstances as you understand them, because that then provides the officer with the basis to go on rather than remembering the note when he come back to the office. Is that okay? But I think you should speak with the officer, and I think also the Director of Finance had offered earlier to meet with you too. So. But that would be helpful. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. I'm more than happy to document it all in writing. But I think a face-to-face conversation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Have the face-to-face, but I think it's always helpful if you've then got a record, and then the officer's got a record of all the details on the system. So, Councillor Sellis.
Thanks, Chairman. Somewhere in this, it mentions that that the staff weren't recording where they were actually working. I'm sorry, I can't find it. However, I've put a note here. Monitoring staff time allocated to various areas of work was poor. They found that. I just wonder whether the staff didn't record it because they're actually really busy doing frontline real work. And is this a process actually worker friendly?
Chair, would you like me to? Yeah. So it's not actually within the SEND audit report, this specific item. It was in the previous report, and it was from the findings for the Traded Services Service. The previous situation was we weren't time recording through the timesheet system around individual commercial activity. What we've actually done is introduced 100%. It's not that onerous, actually, the time recording.
Sorry, what you've introduced is what?
We've reintroduced time recording for all of those that are doing commercial activity. So if you're working on a commercial contract with a school, we've asked staff to just note their time that they're spending on individual contracts. The challenge we had was they are busy, but actually the timesheeting system, there was a differential between individual teams. Some teams were fully time recording everything they were doing. Other teams, not necessarily because of the level of busyness, but just because of historic trends, didn't time record. And what we've said is, no, if you're doing commercial activity, every team should have a record of that commercial activity. It is something that you have to spend a bit of time on, but it isn't onerous. I mean, for those of us who've ever done it, it's a 10-minute job at the end of the day, just jotting down where you are. And for most staff, they've gone fine. We have made one exception, which is the educational psychologists, because they genuinely are busy. And for those of us in the SEND area, they know that they're one of the teams that are really under it. We're working with them to help them around filling out the regular time recording for the commercial side, because, as you say, Councillor, we were very aware that we didn't want to overload them with bureaucracy and admin on that particular area. But we're hoping that that one's been solved.
Thanks, that's why I left nursing.
Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. It comes back to a point you made earlier. We as a committee, we've inherited these issues. So we've got to deal with them, and officers and team members will expect us to robustly ask questions because it's the VFM element of it. And ultimately, whether it's children's services, SEND, adult services, Devon, like all authorities, is in a financial situation that we can't afford to be paying people twice. We can't afford to be paying organisations for work they're not delivering, because every penny now counts, and that applies across all local authorities. So I'm assured. Thank you for your time today. And there is a question, of course, is, you know, you've reported on what's happened. These things weren't picked up. Why our predecessors didn't ask those questions, and if they asked them, why they didn't get the answers they needed to challenge and help guide, because we are essentially, like all scrutiny committees, we're a critical friend. We're here to help, and we want to help, but it's just the assurance we need that we are moving in the right direction. Councillor Morgan touched on it earlier, you know, knowing where we were and seeing improvement, and that consistent improvement, and then we'll all get to a better place. And that is our job. So please, if we ask questions of anyone, it's not criticism, it's not trying to pick holes or find fault, it's because we just want the very best thing. And ultimately, it's the residents and the users of these services. You know, we're sitting here in a nice, you know, warm room, making decisions that affect people's lives and their futures. So that's what we're trying to do. Thank you.
Just want to add to that. That's why I suggested that with the internal audit reports, we know where we were before, because the way it is, it's very easy to miss those warning signs. And clearly, in the past, people have missed those warning signs. So if we know that we're coming from a good place to a bad place, that's where we need to start acting, and acting sooner rather than later, which appears to be the case now.
Thank you. So let's go to the recommendations. Sorry, did I miss you, Julian? My apologies.
No, Chair, it was a sort of strategic point Councillor Hayward was making, so I don't know whether you wanted me to respond to it. Yeah, which I think obviously fits my remit really. So I think I wouldn't disagree with the concern about why wasn't this picked up previously. I think there's a task which is quite challenging in terms of for members trying to triangulate information to get that to a point. And clearly, scrutiny working with audit committee and the cabinet is quite a key element of that work, and making sure that, in a sense, you're looking at the picture holistically together in some shape is quite important in that space. I'd want to reassure audit committee and scrutiny that actually children's services, both in terms of children's social care and SEND, are improving. We've essentially got lots of new staff within the service and new managers, and as touched on before, we have restructured the education and SEND services, and that work is going on as we talk, really, in terms of that. So I'm confident we will be in a better place in terms of some of those issues. But again, it is quite a challenging market in terms of provision. And we are subject to a lot of scrutiny from not just Ofsted, but by what's called the SEND tribunals, which can direct us to do things. They have more power than the High Court, which may be of interest to yourselves. So they can make sure that we provide provision even when we're not quite sure it's the right provision. So there's quite a challenge in that space. It's quite a complex set of issues, but I'm sure you'll get to those over the next few months in terms of looking at those issues. That provides some helpful bigger picture reassurance.
Thank you, and apologies, I didn't see the hand, so I'm really grateful for that additional commentary.
The only other thing I was going to say is I've unfortunately got to leave after that, but Councillor Hill, if you do want to notify us about that concern, I know you're going to talk to the Director of Finance as well, please email, pick it up. Unfortunately, I can't stay for the rest of the session.
That's fine, thank you. So that's very helpful. So let's move to the recommendations. It's very clear from what the Assistant Director has said to us. I think we can all acknowledge the service has been in a dark place and there has been a journey of improvement, and we should acknowledge that. And I think we should thank the staff and leaders who have done that, and brought it forward. But clearly there is, more of the road to travel, isn't there? The recommendation is to note the progress in implementing. I think that's helpful and we should support that. Based on what colleagues have said, did you consider that we wanted to write to the cabinet member for relevant cabinet member for children's services to draw this report to their attention and to seek their assurance that they too are mindful of the journey of improvement? Yeah, you okay with that? I will propose, Councillor Hayward second, are we all in favour? Yeah, and you've got what we're going to do? It's good because I'll have forgotten in 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Let's and thank you very. And if you need to go with our blessings. You know, and then item 12 is the SIPFA self-assessment, and the deputy director and.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, this item is looking at the audit committee self-assessment process that has been defined through SIPFA and also recommended by your external auditors. Just a bit of information, a bit of an oversight on it. So the guidance does cover the purpose of the audit committee, the core and the possible wider functions of the committee. So it's looking at that independence and accountability and that membership and effectiveness of the committee. And one good point I think to pick out is that SIPFA do describe the aim of the guidance is to support your time as an audit committee member. Quite useful to bring that out. What I would say is that with the last group of members, we did start this process with the self-assessment and we went through that process with them late last year. What we would like to do now is to do that process again with yourselves as new members of the audit committee and go through the ask for you to go through those self-assessment questions. We can do that in a workshop situation where Tony and myself, the head of the partnership, can actually take you through the questions. It is your self-assessment. You get to score yourself 1 to 4 on how that's working effectively. The outcome of that will be we will write a report on those conclusions for you to agree. And that may identify some areas that are working really well or some areas where you feel actually we need to do a little bit more here. We need to strengthen the controls around that. And we can offer guidance and advice on how to do that. We can then bring that report back to the next relevant audit committee meeting for ratification. Thinking about the timeline for this, I would say obviously being a new committee, it might be something you want to look at in the autumn in line with thinking that we could bring that to a committee meeting for approval early next year. I'm happy to take your thoughts on that.
So, colleagues, I was on the committee for about 7 months leading up till May. I didn't take part in the assessment. Frankly, I was so new, and with, frankly, May coming up, I just thought that was not a good use of anyone's resource. But I do think that this is, because we're at the start of the council term, we're a new committee. I think there's a lot to be said in doing the assessment. But equally, I just want to lay it out while we have senior officers with us. If in the process of doing that assessment, it identifies a development need for the committee, then we need the assurance that that will be met. You know, because if we're going to be a good, high-functioning audit team, we will need the support that that provides. So I'm willing to spend my time, and I think you're willing to spend your time, provided it's not a one-way street. I haven't heard anything to suggest it is a one-way street. I just wanted to be clear that, you know, that the committee is supported in its improvement too. Councillor Morgan.
Can I just make a comment? An observation is that got a training program conference in mid-September, which I've been on before, which I really recommend if you're new to audit. And can I suggest that maybe we do it after people have attended that, because there's a lot of information there to be had.
So I think the intention is sort of, well, autumn's a very wide, well, it is now, isn't it? I mean, it could be anything for 6 months, but sometime in the autumn. So I'm taking that before the end of the calendar year, with the report coming into early in the next calendar year, and then we'll go from there. Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure who can answer this. It might be yourself, Angie. Is Devon County Council a paid up member subscriber to SIPFA?
So I'm personally SIPFA qualified accountant and a member of SIPFA, yes. As an organisation, SIPFA is a group made up of individuals like me and many of my colleagues, but the organisation itself is not a member of SIPFA, but as individuals I am and many of my colleagues are.
That answers the question, absolutely, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, so thank you. So let's go to the recommendation then, is that the committee reviews and agrees the responses on 1 and 12. Yeah, sit for a self-assessment. Are we content? Yeah, okay. Proposer, Councillor Hill, and a seconder, Councillor Morgan, and we're all in favour. We've got that down. Job done. Thank you very much. So let's go to item 13, which is the risk management update. I forgot. Brad.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. So risk management update for the committee. So just by way of an introduction, Brad Hutton, Senior Insurance Manager for Devon Assurance Partnership. I head up the risk management service for the partnership and for Devon County Council. Just a very quick bit of context as to what is risk. So essentially, the council's vision is to manage potential opportunities and threats in achieving its objectives. So therein lies essentially the definition of risk. By identifying risks and managing them effectively, we can increase our likelihood of success against those objectives or goals. So it's a crucial part of the that integrated assurance picture, and equally helps the council achieve more goals. Similar to Hannah's report for the annual sort of update, risk is slightly different in the sense that it's a continuous process, as in there's no start and end date. However, that being said, I have put a short section here into the performance from 24-25, including just some narrative around new risks added and equally risks that have been archived during that time. Chair, there's been 17 added during 24-25, of which I detail the very highest of those, and 14 risks archived, and again, provide a little bit of narrative around that. Just moving on to current risk performance, the council currently has 116 risks recorded, and the image at the top of page 215 just details where they sit in regards to the current scoring of those risks. Of course, eyes drawn to those two very high risks. The two very high risks that the council currently holds is send, and that's been spoken through an awful lot today, so unsurprising that that's up there right at the very top. Only joined by cybersecurity, and of course one of those areas which continuously the council monitors and ensures it's robust against any challenge there. So I do plot those risks just on our scoring guidance there. So if you make your way sort of bottom of page 215, top of page 216, you can see just where those risks sit with regards to the scoring that we have there. A couple of things additional things to note. Of course, we recognise there's a number of potential risks that fall out from that send area, and in time we've been working with the service, Julian and his team and others to recognise that those risks are an accurate picture. So essentially what I mean by that is, rather than having 10 high risks or high and medium risks, actually the combination of those risks entail a very high risk. So it's making sure that the council recognises that. As we move forward, just a quick note on the current risk management work that we're taking place on page 217. I've just mentioned there, obviously send, a lot of our focus and time spent there, and equally working alongside the cybersecurity team to ensure that that risk is up to date, provide any challenge there, and equally we're looking to develop a new risk around partnership cyber attack. I won't go into detail that, but I'm sure we've all seen in the press a number of cyber related issues, both in the public and private sector, over the last couple of months, which have had catastrophic impacts on those organisations. So essentially we don't want to be one of them, so we're working with colleagues to ensure that we're robust against that challenge. So naturally, two very high risks that are there, that's where we are spending the majority of our time, which hopefully, Chair, you agree that makes sense, given that we are a risk management function. Just a couple other things to note. We recognise that, of course, there are a number of potential risks associated with devolution and local government reorganisation. So we are making, we're working alongside officers, managers, senior leadership to ensure that those risks are recognised on the corporate risk register. And lastly, Chair, we were, or Devon, I should say, were subject to an audit conducted by Cornwall Council on the risk management function at Devon County Council. That's intentional. We didn't want to do it internally as a Devon Assurance Partnership function, just to ensure there's that degree of independence there. And I'm really pleased to say that Council awarded us a reasonable assurance rating, just with a few minor recommendations, if you like, which we're looking to pick up in time. Chair, just lastly, a couple of appendices there. Appendix A just shows the very high and high risks extract there, including just the movement of risk over time. So you can just see down the right hand side there whether it's moved over that time. Appendix B is our Power BI record. So that's a fancy way of saying it's a performance indicator. It's a dashboard where you can see the performance of risk. Appendix C is just our risk scoring guidance for new members. They can just see that. And lastly, Appendix D is just essentially our vision in how to integrate risk with the integrated assurance picture. But I'll pause there, Chair, and happy to take any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And before I come to colleagues for questions, I'm just going to say very clearly, happy for you to ask any question you want. If it is about cyber security, we will go into part 2. So just mention that before, if you're thinking about questions there, we're going to do that. Anyway, and Councillor Hayward.
Thank you. One is just an observation based on a previous point I made. Page 216, if the officers concerned could just deal with the cut and paste issue on page 216. You've got the same link for climate change and failure to prepare a robust budget as you have for infectious diseases. I think that's just a housekeeping issue. The other one is just an observation of that high risks, the outbreak of an emerging infectious disease. Now, what I'm going to say isn't by any stretch, COVID denial, but likelihood high every 1 to 2 years. I mean, I really hope it wouldn't be every 1 to 2 years. And I appreciate as soon as you can take that down to possible, it's still in the red sector. I think for my own sake, and I think what the learning that we have in the UK and elsewhere is I hope it wouldn't be every 1 to 2 years. Perhaps that needs a slight deep down rating to 4 possible. Still keeps it in the red, but it's just not quite so alarming to any external people who read this and think there's one coming down the line and they need to start, stocking up on tin goods and building a bunker. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. I think that's a fair point. I'll be happy to take that back to public health colleagues that we work alongside to make sure that's accurate.
So it may not be inaccurate, but I think the question is to challenge public health on the point that Councillor Hayward makes, is whether that perceived risk is correct.
Yeah, agreed, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Members content to accept the recommendations which are on page 211? Oh, sorry.
And apologies for raising this, but I've raised this before and I'll continue to raise it, that just in looking at language about failure to learn from a serious or significant events, we know from our data with our Prevent and Protect colleagues working with the Home Office in the South West, we are an outlier in certain areas of risks in terms of young people, and it's quite just nothing director, but there's this bit about learning from serious events, but I don't want anybody in Devon thinking that those tragic worldwide events that we see that happen in either shopping malls or schools, or you'll know the context I'm describing, or has happened in England recently, and the devastation that these significant events can create to an organisation. I'm just surprised that I don't quite think the language of this report recognises that, and I'm very clear as the Chief Executive that we're a place of protest as an organisation. We represent democracy, and so we have security on site for a reason, and that these things are not preventable. We want to learn from them. So I would just like to raise that as an issue, because I don't want anybody thinking that those kind of things don't happen. And we'll know there was a recent schools event in Devon that was on the media, and everybody worked together on that. And there will be learning from these events, but I just think it's important to point it out that I see that as a gap in this document today in the way that's been described. And apologies, Chair, I probably should have picked up before then, but like yourselves, don't always get to every single line, so I apologise for raising it now.
Let's just sort of set up a ricochet train. So Councillor Hill.
Thank you. Just on that sort of train of thought, members will be aware that obviously Martin's Law is now coming in, and reading the guidance, and perhaps it's not really a thing for audit, but again, while we're just sort of ruminating on these things, for a member training opportunity through the relevant officer for members. I'm sure staff, employees are aware of it, but perhaps a lot of councillors are not, and we are in a building that would absolutely qualify for Martin's Law compliance or relevance. So perhaps that could be taken forward. Thank you.
I'll leave the Chief Executive to ponder upon that question.
Yes, I think that training, we are all responsible to get up-to-date training in these areas, and I'm sure we can arrange that. I think it's really important that you raised that, so thank you.
And I just wanted to pick up the wider issue about risk management. It is my personal view that actually audit committees should spend more time considering risk, having a greater awareness of it. So the fact that this is agenda item 13 is only because there are a lot of things and something has to be agenda item 13. What would anyone think? I think probably many organisations have not given it the time that it deserves. And so I really welcome the report, and I would say to officers and to the audit partnership, if there is something that you feel specifically the committee should be made aware of, please do, and consider that an open door, and I think we will want that. All right.
Thank you, Chair.
Good. So let's go to page 211, the recommendations 1 and 2. Are we content? And how are we content that we have reviewed the updates to the risk management process? I think we have, haven't we? All right. So proposed Councillor Hill, seconded Councillor Hayward. Did you okay with that? Are we all agreed? I think we are. All sorted. Job done. Thank you very much. Let's move to counter fraud annual report. And Tony Rose, head of the Devon Audit Partnership, has returned.
Thank you, Chair. A few brief points on this, picking up your initial comments earlier about key activities and key aspects of this. I think firstly, clarity that each audit committee does receive a counter fraud update in general. There may be occasions where that doesn't happen, but the predominant aim is to bring an update at each meeting. This particular report is wrapped up as an annual report, so it's bringing together a summary of activity over a period of time. I think that the headlines for me to note are actually around section 1 and the council's strong desire for a strong counter fraud culture. That very much is something that is prevalent and things that both officers and ourselves try hard to support. I think that's born in the later table with the self-assessment or the resilience assessment, sorry, that's also noted in section 3. There are a lot of questions in there that we work through to really understand how the council is approaching counter fraud. From our perspective, you heard from my colleagues and the team there around risk and audit, and we do very much try to make sure that the counter fraud, risk and audit join together. So that integrated assurance approach is something that we feel does bring even more value to that. I think the leadership aspect comes out again in section 6 around the single person discount exercise, and the summary in there shows that they're following that activity, which was predominantly supported there by the Director of Finance and Public Value and would not have happened without that support, has generated a potential uplift in collectible council tax of just over 2 million because of we will consider error and fraud in that, because it is both in that instance. So there's lots of good work going on. And I think finally the last point is around section 8 and the fact that we're trying to make sure that the counter fraud activity itself moves forward and that we are understanding how we can use information and data to be even more proactive in this area. But the report hopefully speaks to itself in the activity that's been undertaken and the positive culture around that.
Thank you for that. And I just wanted to draw the two parallels, because 6.1, which is the work, which was excellent work, which was done on misuse of a single person discount and the increased revenue of just over £2 million. Absolutely brilliant piece of work. I'm sure there are many people who it's an inadvertent error, and there was an article in my BBC news stream today of a councillor elsewhere in the country who had fallen foul of what they described as a complex council form. But nonetheless, people can make an innocent error as well as be deliberately doing it. So it's good, and it shows for the small investment. The other side of it is in a previous report to this committee on the internal work, for example, where our systems, it's not that it was fraud, but our systems were sloppy and we were paying people after they left. So while we must be absolutely correct in wanting to make sure people who should be paying are paying, the other side of the coin is to reassure that same community that inside here our processes are spot on, and it's not okay to have a kind of do it when you get to it, because at the end of it, even if an employee's left and they suddenly get a letter from the former employer saying lovely to speak to you, by the way you owe us, it's probably not the best letter most people want to receive, is it? And it's an out payment. So I'm really glad to have the counter fraud report, but I think equally that there are lessons on both sides, aren't there? Any questions, colleagues? Content? Councillor Hayward?
Thank you. Only observation. Thank you for the report. Within East Devon recently, you'll be aware there was a very high profile case around Cranbrook and district heating that resulted in conviction of various people there. And I think that gives the public confidence that actually it is taken seriously and that there's no place for it. I mean, we refer in the report here to the gifts and hospitality. It exists. It's in the registry of interest. It's on our things we do. I personally can't see any reason to give a council a gift or hospitality. It just adds something that can be misused, could be misused, but as long as it's being monitored. But I often find that when you look at sort of fraud considerations, people are looking for those big ticket items. Another did this. Actually, most fraud is very low level, small amounts over a long period of time that hope to go unnoticed under the radar, but cumulatively make a big impact. So, and I can see from this that that's covered as well. So you have the both ends of the scale. You're looking for those big ticket items, but also analysing patterns. And as long as members and employees understand that and they know it's going on, that should be enough to nip it in the bud. There will obviously always be cases, and as long as we robustly, so I'm pleased to see zero tolerance. That's what it needs to be. Zero tolerance. It's not, oh, we'll let you get away with it this time. No, it's not on, and we won't do it, because as I come back to that point, we are in a sticky wicket financially, as all financial authorities, and we can't afford for it to happen, and we need public trust in what we do. So thank you.
Before you answer, Tony, in case you're thinking of it, let me just say for the benefit of the tape, there are very clear rules about gifts and hospitality for councillors, as there are for officers, and invited to the opening of a community centre and there is a buffet laid on, might well be regarded hospitality, but I don't think anyone consciously would think that they have been succumbed to voting in a particular way or doing something. So there are very clear rules set out, and that's why the disclosures are there, aren't they? And sensible people take the view better to disclose than not, even if they've gone to I don't know, a conference and had a dinner one evening sponsored by somebody or other. So that's it. Anyway, Tony, briefly, because I am keen to end the meeting.
I would just say, echo the comments, Chair. I think the approach to counter fraud needs to be strong, and I think there are those scales of it, and we do work very hard around that to make sure we can raise those issues, and hopefully the committee are assured that the right approach is being taken.
Okay, thank you very much. And is the committee content to note the report? Proposed, seconded, or proposed Councillor Hayward, seconded me. All in favour? Marvellous, job done. Thank you very much. Item 15, the date of the next planned meeting is the 29th of September, but that's too long to miss your company. So we're going to have another meeting in July, a date to be decided, and we'll ask our colleagues in the team to communicate with us PDQ so we can get that in the diary and sorted and protected from holiday actions. There's nothing else you want to talk about in the meeting itself, is there? No, good. So just to remind you, we are going to have an informal conversation on a point that Councillor Sellis wants to raise about the agendas. So I'm going to close the meeting now.